Welcome to the 46th episode of the Hail Mary podcast. I'm AToves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're back to give our hot takes on our beatdown of Rice and throw some Hail Mary shots downfield for our listeners to love or hate. Let's get started. Bad memories of another cold and rainy November matchup loomed in the mind of Roadrunner players and fans before this game. Fortunately, this time it had a much different outcome. While the Roadrunners' first drive ended in a Brady punt, the next three drives resulted in touchdowns, giving UTSA a commanding 21-0 first quarter lead. Even with turnovers on the next two possessions, Rice could not capitalize and were clearly outmatched. The Roadrunners added two more touchdowns and a pair of field goals in a decisive 41-7 win. UTSA won the Conference USA regular season championship and secured home field advantage in the championship game. What were your thoughts on the game?
Well, first you brought up the weather, and it was bearable because when we first went and sat down, we looked to our left and there were a bunch of people we know. Some of our fellow section mates there with Stephen Gomez and Brian Elliott. And then, of course, the Alamodome Audible guys were there, Jared and Adrian. Lots of fun getting the chance to hang out with them throughout the game. And I think Jared pretty much said it at one point. It's so much more bearable to sit through this kind of cold, miserable game when you're around friends, right? So that was one thing. Also, just really want to shout out real quick. We've seen him a few times. Glad to see someone who listens to us. Robert, appreciated him coming up to us again, talking to us. Appreciate you listening. So hopefully we make this a good podcast episode for you.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, you kind of talked about this, the bad memories of, cold and rainy November game. I just think that there were differences in terms of last season and this season.
Sure.
Last season there was this huge, just, as much as I didn't want to say it at the time, because I didn't want to believe it, there certainly was, a letdown after, that huge UAB win.
Sure.
Because you needed that win, not only to legitimize your record, but also to give yourself a chance to even go to the championship game. I mean, we've talked about it a few times, like, they lose that game against UAB, and let's say that they win at North Texas, they're still left out of the championship game. So, it was certainly a lot of things that led up to everything that happened in Denton. Weather sure played a part, but, the fact that they didn't really show up there was a problem. So, in this game, it just didn't. I just guess I would just say that Rice was just so overmatched that it was clear from the start, right? Like this.
Yeah, I mean, it was different in terms of the match, but it was also very different in terms of the mindset of the team going in. I mean, I think, again, when you're coming into a game where you have 11 wins, yes, they were going up for this, undefeated regular season. There were all these little sayings, don't eat the cheese and whatever, but, they did kind of get to a point where I think they felt like they were indestructible, especially after that big UAB win. This team has a completely different mindset. They feel like they're battling adversity, whether it's internal with the injuries, the losses they faced at the beginning of the season, the fact that the majority of the team knows what that felt like at North Texas. I think they just had a very different mindset. They were definitely very dialed in. The coaches were reminding them about the North Texas game. The media was reminding them about the North Texas game. They were reminding each other about that. And, it just kind of seemed very different, even from apparently as soon as they got on the field and Dadrian Taylor being the, unofficial leader of the defense, taking off his shirt to, show them he's going to be tough and it was going to be a different game. And
according to Frank, having a few
screws loose.
That was if you didn't get to hear the post-game press conference, that was a really fun moment from Frank, just talking about Dadrian after they asked him, he took off his shirt, what did you think about that? He's always got a few screws loose. So, we're not just making something up about Dadrian. No, I agree, but I think part of that, and this is something I wanted to ask you about, was, I felt like the foundation of all like these last two seasons was actually set, obviously in Traylor's first season.
Right.
Tons of adversity with COVID, tons of adversity, either, I guess, to back up on COVID, internally and externally, whether you don't know if you're going to play that opponent the next week. And then, also, are you going to be healthy enough to play that week?
Right. And it was injuries as well as illness,
Exactly. So there was plenty of adversity, and then they went through some adversity last year. There was some injuries. We kind of mentioned before, Maka was not really healthy the whole season, so snapping wasn't as great. You had Mekhi Hart miss some games. I mean, there were injuries in different places. This season has just been even more incredible in terms of injuries to the offensive line, where you've gotten to a point of you have a walk on playing right tackle, and so it's just interesting that we get to this point and we start questioning them again. And it's like every single time we question them, you can tell this team is absolutely focused.
Sure.
And to your point, do we really, I mean, I guess I should really say, to what you said, should we really be questioning them anymore?
No, but I think they need that. I mean, they're a team that seems like they need to have a chip on their shoulder. And I think going into last year into the North Texas game, they didn't have that, and we saw kind of the difference. But I feel like this is just a team that's sort of built from the, we're being underestimated, let's come from behind kind of mentality, and they seem to rise to the occasion. So it's almost good when people project that the game might be harder than needs to be, or, look at the beginning of the season and say maybe it's going to be a 7-5 season instead of a 6-6. Like, they seem to rise to the occasion.
Yeah, and I think that also has to do something also with Traylor, because as much as they talk about Traylor and some of the things he reminds them of, because they even talked about the fact that, he kept bringing it up that he didn't want them to feel like they felt after Houston, after, Texas, and also after Denton last year. And, to me, I just really thought that this team is also reminded at times, and, maybe it isn't how he might put it, but I'm sure that he reminds them, hey, you weren't really recruited that much by such and such school,
Sure.
or this other school didn't really think that you could play or whatever. It certainly will be a motivating factor, especially for most of these guys who are really at times, I would say 3 stars, or 2 stars or 1 stars. Their collective, we've talked about before, is so much better than just them being individuals. They're all really good individuals as well, but when they get together and they really play, I think they do a very good job. And we saw it against Rice, and I think it was easy to see it against Rice because, again, I go back to what I said about the game against La Tech, where UTSA was clearly strong, bigger, stronger, faster.
Yeah, and the other piece, when you look at the Rice game, look at the adversity they faced during the game and how they handled it. You had the quarterback go down, second drive of the game.
Right.
He's the starter at the beginning of the season, but he can't play, so he's coming in for the guy who's been starting, who's injured. So we're on QB number 2. Then you see QB number 3 come in. He does okay, but he throws an interception. They go to QB number 4. It seems like for a few drives in the first half, almost every drive, whether it was Rice on offense or Rice on defense, had someone go down. I mean, they were just falling all over themselves, getting injured, and instead of rising to the occasion, you kind of just saw Rice crumble. It almost felt like at some point they're like, we just got to survive and get out of this game and try to keep our bowl eligibility hopes up against North Texas next week.
Yeah, as a guy would fall down, I at one point I leaned over to you and I said, "Are we gonna hurt some of these kids badly?" Because it felt like that at times.
And I'm sure that quarterback Wiley, he's probably back out for the rest of the season again.
Yeah, he could be. I mean, he got smacked pretty hard. Looked like maybe there was, speculate a little bit. It probably looked a little more like collarbone-ish because of the fact that the way they were holding his right arm, and you saw the same thing with Josh Atkins, unfortunately. Right. Back in 2020. So, yeah, I mean, certainly it did feel like we were obviously, as I said, we were the bigger, stronger team. Though I will say that they were being very judicious in how at times when we went up tempo, they all of a sudden would go to the ground.
Yeah.
That is a certain way I would say, to slow down this UTSA offense at times, is to start pulling the fake injuries. And, we saw it a couple times, before in other games, but this game, it just seemed like they were doing it. But on one hand, it felt like they were doing it because man, I don't know if I want to be in the game anymore. And to your point of
In my misery.
yeah, and my misery now. I guess the only other thing I wanted to say about just the game conditions is the fact that when we were doing the rewatch, it didn't really come out at times just how the rain was really being sporadic. Like there were like for the longest time in the first half, it was really light, and then all of a sudden, like near the end of the first half, it just started coming down. But it wasn't so hard, like up there in Denton last season, where it was just like that the entire time.
Right.
It was, like you said, it just kind of came and went. But one thing that we didn't feel as much, but I think that people that were sitting closer to the field, certainly felt was the wind.
Yeah.
It was blowing what they said, I think, northeasterly. So if you're looking at it if you're watching the game, it was going from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. And it was, I think, more apparent when Rice went for 2 field goals late in the first half, because the kicker clearly was trying to compensate for that wind.
Mm-hmm.
And, it just, you kind of felt bad because you knew that they weren't going to get any more chances to score.
Right.
They ended up scoring, but still, it just felt like they're not going to get very many more chances just because that offense just really isn't moving. The only other thing I was going to say was, you're right. After Wiley Green got knocked out, Trash, and I don't remember how to say his first name. He's actually the quarterback that I gave the preview on. He came in. We both agreed. Like, he did okay. Like,
yeah.
He led them on 2 field goal drives, but it's not his fault that the kicker missed both field goals. Now he comes out in the third quarter, and I think it was the second or third play of the second half. He throws the interception, but it just felt like, you throw in a young guy in a really bad spot, in AJ Padgett, and you could tell he struggled. And when you have a UTSA defense that's, I hate to put it this way again too, but much like La Tech, it felt like they were swarming at every single point.
Right.
I mean, it was clear they were trying to stop the run. So you saw white jerseys in the backfield. It certainly had to have been, I guess, overwhelming to come in right at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Getting the ball to about the 25-yard line and then looking at this defense that you've been on the sideline and have seen, they're just penetrating past your offensive line over and over. It's, it was certainly, I would say, not a feeling that I would want to ever feel.
Yeah, definitely. The interesting thing about this game is that when you look at the stats, it would almost tell you, if you didn't watch the game at all and you just looked at the stats, you would not expect to see the score that you see. I mean, if you look at UTSA's time of possession, it's 25 minutes versus Rice at 34 minutes. We only had 394 yards of total offense, which is, I think, the lowest all season.
Yes, it is, yes.
And then if you go back and you look at our PFF ratings for our offense, it's the second worst game of the season, Texas and FIU being tied as the worst game in terms of our offensive performance. You would look at all of those stats and not expect to see a score that says 41-7.
It was the turnovers, like you mentioned earlier, that really helped with the short fields. And I would say the other big thing was the fact that, and Traylor mentioned this after, post game, was, look, we mass substituted, and that can be really hard, mm-hmm. and our guys just couldn't execute. And that was somewhat frustrating, because you wanted to see some of these younger guys come in and get, for a second week in a row, get some, good snaps.
Yeah.
But then not be able to really move the ball or get a chance to really shine. And, I think if you looked at Eddie Lee's performance, you see his stats, and immediately you would think, well, he didn't look very good. He's 4 for 8. But there was some drops, just like with Frank. There was a couple of drop passes. The weather, I mean, I don't know that it was necessarily the weather. It might have been the wind a little bit. Certainly, it's raining, so, your hands get a little slicker. But, I just think that it just gets to a point where it's like, all right, clearly Rice wants to get out of here. UTSA wants to get out of here. I mean,
the fans wanted to get out of there because it was in the 40s, but
Well, and one thing before we move on is it was really nice to see Rice travel to UTSA's only outdoor home game, because
exactly.
let me tell you, if you could hear it on the rewatch, we could certainly hear ourselves chanting the entire time.
And our
Um,
band.
and yeah, no, I mean it was clear that if you were looking at the UTSA sideline, plenty of UTSA fans that traveled, or Houston, obviously alumni that showed up. Rice literally had like maybe I would say 5 people that were actually sitting lower than like the top quote unquote suite levels.
Right.
But yeah, it was certainly a rough moment for Rice, but you know what? We got the win. We got a nice showing in Houston. Let's talk about special teams. Really, was there really anything you wanted to nitpick on? Because I thought Sackett was great again. Hitting a couple of field goals when called upon. I think both of them were against the wind. I could be wrong. One of them, actually, no. You know what? They were in the third quarter, so they were actually with the wind. But I don't think he really needed the wind.
No.
Jared's got a really good leg, and it's been pretty consistent lately. So I don't think there's any qualms there.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing in this special teams review is, again, we saw Brendan Brady pooch punt the ball, second time this season. It's very confusing for the announcers and for the statisticians that are following this game, because how many times do you really see a running back punting?
Right.
So first of all, if you watched on ESPN, they said it was Frank Harris that punted, which it wasn't. And then if you look at any of the stats for the games that didn't come directly from UTSA, they credit Lucas Dean with the punt, because I guess, Brendan and Lucas wearing the same number is also
single digits.
Yeah,
right.
Also confusing for them. But, Brendan, once again, he comes in, he punts, which is obviously not his specialty, and he pins Rice to the 1-yard line. I mean, just amazing that he's able to do that.
I never thought I'd say, hey, we might have a better punter than Lucas Dean. But is Brendan Brady it? I mean,
he had the longest punt of the night out of all of the punts that Dean had. So, I mean, it's just pretty interesting to see that.
I'd like to think that Dean was just, kind of thrown off a little, maybe, shaken by the fact that maybe Brendan was really aiming for his job like right before he finishes the season. So, I don't know. I mean, that's just me just kind of spitballing here.
Although Dean's probably happy with the fact that he gets credited with Brady's, stats on the punting, because it's not like they're bad. So, anyways. But yeah, I mean, really, special teams, there were a couple of inconsistent return coverages on the kickoffs, but, nothing crazy.
With the different weather, with the weather kind of, affecting both teams, I don't know that there's necessarily much you can take away from it, except the fact that, hey, look, if you can turn the corner at times, you're going to have some guys sliding away, but if you can turn the corner, then you might have a lot of green ahead of you. Excuse me. With that, let's move to the offensive review, keys to victory review. I said, hey, let's attack the middle of that Rice D in the running game. First 2 touchdowns were essentially runs up the middle. I know the first touchdown from Frank was like, he's kind of scrambling around, but he essentially went through the middle of where, both, where their offensive line would have been. And then that second touchdown was essentially, just an inverted veer option play that he could have handed off to Josh and probably could have gotten a touchdown, but, being a little selfish, a good selfish, I would say, because it was odd to me that they didn't have more of a spy on Frank. Mm-hmm. It was like, you know what, we're going to make Frank beat us. We're not going to let anybody else beat us. And it's like, well, that's not how successful defenses really attack UTSA. But hey, whatever Rice wanted to do, they wanted to do, that's fine. The only other thing I was going to say was Brady's long run was another one up the middle. I mean, they've got talent on the outs. Rice has had some talent on the outside on defense, and hence why I said let's attack the middle, because that's where they're just going to be a little softer. The other part was I wanted to see them challenge the linebackers to cover the tight ends. Now, due to the weather and really the success on the ground, there was really no reason to really go through the air too much, and even so, like, we didn't really get too much tight end action, though we did get Oscar's first touchdown, I think, of the season.
Right.
Nice little kind of play where he just all of a sudden gets left alone. I don't know how a man that large gets left alone, but you know what? That's why Rice's defense isn't very good.
I know, and it's almost a year ago since he scored the touchdown at UAB, so.
Yep, that was really cool to kind of look back and realize that, yes, it's been about a year. So, hey, look, we mentioned the rushing. You mentioned it too. It was a season best, 262 yards. Three big runs. So we had 63 from Frank, 45 from Kavorian, and 42 from Brady. It's tough to beat UTSA, even if they're not ripping off long runs like that. But once you see this trio like rip off some long runs, it's gonna be a long day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was more than half of our total rushing yards for the game.
I will say this. I think, we were looking at just to nitpick a little bit, but Clifford Chapman gets essentially an interception and takes it down to the 11. Kind of feel like, we were going to put that one away. And, I had put a prediction of 44 to 13 as the final score. Ended up 41-7, so not too bad from my end. But, would have liked to see them put that one away and just kind of, instead of settling for a Jared Sackett field goal, really put one away and continue to kind of really get Frank off the field sooner.
Yeah, and Frank mentioned that one in the post game. You could tell it sort of irked him that they didn't get the touchdown there. But it was also funny to hear him say, I guess Traylor told them, if you want to stay warm, score quickly and get off the field. So that was kind of his thought process, apparently, going into the game.
I mean, that's fair, right? Look,
yeah.
You're going to want to get off the field. And get off the field, they did. I mean, there were a lot of big plays here. And, I think just the overall story from the offense was, sure, the yards may not look at it. And like you said, the stats may not show it. But I don't know that I would give up this performance, outside of the fact that, hey, look, in some bad conditions, you guys still put up some points. So whatever. We got the win. We got out of there. That said, offensive player of the game. I was looking for players because there just didn't seem to be enough guys putting up stats. But I'm kidding. It's Frank Harris.
I mean, he kind of put the game on his shoulders and was like, guys, I got this.
He did, and I want to talk about that a little bit later. So hold that thought. We'll move on to the defense right now. Essentially, the keys to victory was bottle up the run. Shouldn't have to put up those full numbers like you did against North Texas. This UTSA defense, I think we have to be careful of, because these are essentially La Tech and Rice, two teams that aren't very good. So they have been putting up some good stats. But we got to just be careful. Not to say that this defense isn't good. It's just the fact that the stats will maybe make you think otherwise. And let me give you negative 11 yards rushing for Rice in the first half. And then for the game, 5 yards.
Right.
So now we're essentially top 3 in rushing defense, which I laugh about. But, I mean, it takes games like this and like against, UNT when it was like 21 rushes for 22 yards that we held them to. It's those types of games that it'll take you will see then all these stats plummet, and all of a sudden we're looking like this top 3 rushing defense. I still think that this defense is probably one of the best in Conference USA, stats aside. And it's just that, once you get kind of allow a few long drives and long runs, it's going to make you look a little worse than you are. The only other thing I had in terms of keys to victory was pressure McMahon and turnovers. Like, he didn't get to play, unfortunately. But certainly this defense really started putting out pressure on these quarterbacks. So much so, it caused Rice a lot of havoc because there was a lot of blitzes from our secondary. And that's really where, things got kind of interesting because essentially Rice would come up to the line of scrimmage, and they're not an up-tempo team. They're a huddle every single play team. So they would huddle, they would get to the line of scrimmage, and UTSA wouldn't show their secondary blitz until the very last minute. So much so that there were a couple of times where you thought that we had been offsides.
Right. It looked like it, yeah.
But when you're on your own home field, you're going to get those calls, and they're not going to flag you for being offside. So there's that. But let's talk about the fact that we only allowed 230 yards, lowest all season. Any thoughts on that?
Overall, I felt like the defense played really well. Again, you mentioned, causing a lot of havoc from the secondary. When you look back at the post-game notes for UTSA, the note under Corey Mayfield said, lived in the backfield, which I thought was kind of funny, but true. Corey, it's not typical to see a corner sacking a quarterback, but, in this environment, in this scheme, that's what happened. And, He was clearly enjoying himself.
I mean, the boys, I would say, on defense were turned loose.
Yeah.
And I think what I think is good about this is just the fact that it now, I think, gives defenses more to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Especially North Texas. North Texas, we talked about the fact that, they had put up all these numbers, up on the line of scrimmage to stop the run. Seeing some of these late blitzes and some of the way they disguise some of these defensive plays, certainly, like, I think you have to kind of back off a little bit on Lep, but you also have to realize, like I said, be careful here because it was Rice. They have an awful line, which has been ravaged by, injuries as well. So while, we were able to live in the backfield, remember the disparity in talent, and let's not get too high and think, oh yeah, look at, how great the defense is. There are still some holes here, but when you see them flying around having fun like this and then getting a chance to, essentially leave the field early, it's always good because, again, going back to those injuries, you want to limit anything that happens there.
Right. I mean, two things that I thought were kind of interesting. Going into this game, Rice has had a turnover problem, a significant turnover problem.
Right.
And I guess one thing that you can say went well for Rice is that they only had 3 turnovers in this game.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you're excited about only having 3 turnovers, 1 interception and 2 fumbles.
Well, 2 fumbles they lost. They fumbled it
that
like 8 times. I mean,
That's
they
true.
were having a snapping problem, and I think
they were recovering their own fumbles, though, so it's okay.
And let me just say this. It's a good thing they recovered those other 6 because this could have gotten even uglier if that was the case.
Right. And the other player that I wanted to call out that had a good game, and because this player almost committed to Rice, was probably really enjoying himself even more so, and that was Kelechi. He had 6 tackles, 1 sack, 1 tackle for loss, and 1 pass deflected. Kelechi had told a story recently about how he had tried to decommit from UTSA to commit to Rice, and Frank Wilson talked him out of it, which he obviously was very happy about now. So it almost seemed like, he was really using this opportunity to kind of take it to Rice as well.
Your boy Kelechi, the guy you have a soft spot for.
I do. That's why I had to call it out.
All right, let's get to the defensive player of the game. This is a guy that I thought or was hoping that he would step up a little bit more. He's been a little maligned by some UTSA fans, but you know what? He's come through. That's Clifford Chapman. He had 1 interception, 4 tackles, and 2 pass breakups. I wasn't sure how he'd react after the loss of Rashad for the season, but I think it's certainly been a bright spot that even against teams like La Tech and Rice, but even before then, that he's really stepped up his game and he has looked pretty good. In terms of really, I think I'm going to put this quote unquote, being the sheriff in the secondary, where he's been laying the big hits. Mm-hmm. He's been intercepting some passes. So just good to see him have some success after last season, his season being cut short.
Right.
Well, AToves, that time again. What did we learn from the game?
Well, clearly we learned that we can play in the cold and rain.
Yes, we certainly can. I don't think there was as much question from us, but
yeah, we talked a lot about the elements, but certainly that is a checkbox now.
Good to hear. All right, one other thing we learned, I think, to me, is just the difference between last year's team and this year's team. There's been a lot of debate over, and I think you can't have the debate which team was better, last season or this season. And I don't want to talk about the talent on the teams. And when I say this, I'm just going to say this team is better because of what they learned last year. Last season, things just went quote unquote perfectly, right? Everything seemed to be, like you had talked about before, really came up roses. You're going through a perfect season. Things are just falling in place. You end up getting ranked as high as 15th. This season, this team comes out and, to your point, it was like, well, it's not going to be as good a season. Or just, the out of conference.
Schedule's harder, yeah.
It's so much harder. Everything's, going to be more difficult. I heard from, UTSA essentially, don't judge us by our first 4 games. It was...
We got punched in the mouth a little bit by Houston.
Yeah. It was certainly, obviously, kind of try to downplay everything. And it was like, just wait till conference play. And then that's when things will really rise. Oh, okay. Yeah, they did. But we also knew that this team was going to be good. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of returning starters from last season. There was, I think, really a bad taste in their mouth of how they ended November last season. And when I was looking at this entire, Conference USA schedule, all I kept thinking about was, like, we don't have, like, the toughest November schedule. But regardless of what happens up in CUSA at that point, I know that these guys are going to really want to close out the season as best as they can. And, to this point, they have. We'll talk about UTEP here in a little while and preview that game. But, to me, I think another big difference is just the fact that, we were listening to JJ and Greg do their, post-game, wrap-up. And, there was talk about, like, how Frank is never happy with the offense. Like, he's always like, nope, we just didn't do enough. And I just made a comment to you that I felt like it's because Frank really has taken ownership of the offense. Whereas, like, last season, I made the case to you that it was, like, Sincere's offense because it was, he was the one that, if he gets going, then this UTSA offense and the UTSA team is just going to be so, so good. And we knew that Frank had taken, obviously a few steps up last season. And then this season we're like, well, we expect him to take even further steps. Well, I don't think he took a further steps. I think he took a huge ass leap and really took ownership of this offense. And we look back and we see all these injuries and, I could, go through all of the names, but if I was to tell you, hey, these are all the guys that are injured, but we have this score or we have this, record at this point in time, what would your initial thoughts be?
Well, it means Frank didn't get injured for sure.
Exactly. And I think that, it obviously is such a dumb moment again, like I like to put it, but it's Frank. Like, Frank has become the guy. Like, last season, as much as we probably were hoping it wouldn't happen, we're like, if Sincere gets hurt, can Frank shoulder that load? This season, it's like, if Frank gets hurt, season's gone down because, yes, we have some talented backup quarterbacks, but no one can replace the heart and soul that is Frank Harris. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think this really epitomized it too, as you're just watching him, and I kind of, jokingly said, oh, he was being selfish and didn't hand off the ball, but, he's had such, a tough career at times that let the guy just kind of cook again and just let him go and make some big runs. Though I will say I was afraid that he might slip and in the rain. So
he did break his own school record of rushing yards by a quarterback in this game. His previous record had been UIW.
Just always breaking something.
I know. I mean, at this
least
point,
it's records, right?
Exactly. At this point, he's just breaking his own records because I think he's broken almost every quarterback record or every quarterback record there is in the school history. So,
right.
Someone can fact check me on that, but outside of that, I mentioned earlier UTSA won the regular season and will now host their second straight Conference USA championship game. It was a little interesting to see this trophy coming out at the end of the game because, I don't really think, at least I didn't think about a regular season champion because in the past we've had, East and West divisions, but because there's only one division this year, there's a regular season champion and there was a big old trophy and it was, handed to Trailer at the end of the game, and so we got to see the kids posing with it and having a lot of fun. So one of those things that's kind of interesting. Again, when we were talking about listening to Greg and JJ on their wrap up, Greg was, questioning, okay, so is there going to be like a regular season, banner that they put up, or, hopefully we win the championship game and we can, just say regular season and championship win? How does that work?
Well, I kind of thought about it in the way, like, you do basketball, because UTSA basketball does have a regular season, like Southland Conference regular season championship banner. So, it's weird in football, but I think because all these
it's not a tournament, it's
right.
Like so yeah.
But essentially, conferences are going away from divisions, and everybody's kind of playing each other, and then they play a championship game essentially to decide who goes on to. It's almost playoffs because you're trying to get to the playoffs or to a good bowl. So, it's interesting, yes. But when they brought it out, I was like, well, I didn't really think they would actually honor that, but
yeah. Looking more and more like we're either going to face North Texas or Western Kentucky if North Texas beats Rice next weekend, then they have the tiebreaker with Western Kentucky, regardless of what Western Kentucky does. If they lose and Western Kentucky wins against FAU next week, then Western Kentucky would be who we would play. So, one of the two. Certainly think probably from just sort of an outsider perspective, the more competitive matchup and the more exciting matchup would be against North Texas. But, man, I think there's also a lot of angst and anxiety that goes into a matchup with North Texas for a second time in the year.
Well, none of these games are going to be pretty much easy. I mean, last season it was the angst about we had to play Western Kentucky again. I mean, we barely beat them at their own home.
Right.
And it's essentially a miraculous Clarence Hicks diving interception to really put that game away. So, I mean, no matter what, it's probably going to be something that we fear. But, if you're asking me which one of these two that I'd rather play, I would rather play Western Kentucky because I don't think Western Kentucky is that good. But if it's gonna be North Texas. I think you put it so much better. It's like, what's better than like wresting the championship away from your rival, like just winning it right in their face.
Yeah,
we'll take it anytime.
So Rice, if you want to duct tape yourself up and try and beat North Texas next week to get bowl eligible, no one's gonna be upset about that. But nonetheless. We did find out today that UTSA got ranked in the coaches poll. They're just outside, kind of effectively 26th spot in the AP poll. Of course, the one poll that really, really matters is the playoff poll that will come out on Tuesday. And, we'll see how we do there. Obviously last year, they didn't seem to like UTSA very much in that poll, but who knows? But if we don't get ranked this week, it's certainly something to give us another thing to play for next week against UTEP. And not to mention, if we beat UTEP next week, it will be the first time we have beat the Texas Trio.
Well, there you go.
So we gotta take down UTEP. It's the last time we'll have that opportunity to beat North Texas, UTEP, and Rice in the same year. So one more thing to play for.
All right, I got one last thing that we learned from this game. We know that Coach Traylor can actually, he moves down the sideline pretty fast if he needs to. I don't think I've seen him move as fast as post-game when the guys wanted to
give him the ice bath. Yeah.
It certainly was, I think, quite the sprint I saw from him on a wet field, mind you. And what was it? I think he had plastic bags on his shoes.
Yeah, I mean, he like showed his socks in the post-game press conference. It was kind of funny. But, expect the unexpected when it comes to Coach Traylor, right? I mean...
Yeah. Well, but like I say, like that sprint, I was like, is that Traylor that's running over there?
Yeah.
And I realized, oh, it was. Why is he running? And then I see the guys with the ice baths, and I was like, all right. But the reason I'm bringing it up is just clearly our guy can maybe beat other coaches in the 40. I'm just saying, like, I think that's a nice motivating factor for Traylor if he ever wants to take on anybody in a 40.
Or like a coach's death match where they have to sprint down the field or something. Yeah.
Okay, let's get to our UTEP preview. Weather's gonna be great because it's in the Dome Sweet Dome. It can be as cold as it can be outside, but inside it'll be a nice 74 degrees.
That's right.
All right, so UTEP is fighting for bowl eligibility. Do you remember when it used to come down to that last game? You've brought it up a couple of times, but you remember that feeling?
I know, that 2016, 2017 feeling where we were wondering if that last game we were going to get to win number 6. It's crazy to think now we just blow past that. But these other schools, again, they're Rice, UTEP, FAU. They're all fighting to the very end to see if they can get to win number 6 and make a bowl.
Hence why I appreciate where UTSA is right now, because of the fact that we don't have to suffer through all of that.
Right.
And try to figure out, are we going bowling or not.
Mm-hmm.
appreciated, very much appreciated. UTSA opens up as an 18-point favorite over UTEP, who is 5-6 overall, 3-4 in CUSA. All-time series is UTSA is up 7-2, and this is actually going to be the final game in the series, unless we schedule an out-of-conference series. But
it probably won't be for many, many years.
Right. Any fond UTEP memories?
Fond? No. I think that the UTEP memories that stick with me are the 2 games that we lost so painfully. So yeah, no, I can't say that there's been fond memories of playing UTEP. But I know a lot of people have, quite an affinity for going to the Sun Bowl and playing UTEP. I will tell you, it's been nice to have that feeling that we almost had a check-the-box win on the schedule, though.
Well, I guess the reason that I asked that is because of the fact that the reason you have that bitter taste is because both UTEP wins have been in the Dome.
They have.
But they were back in 2016 and 2014. So, it's
much
been
different
a while.
Much different teams.
Yeah, much different teams. During the trailer era, UTSA is 2-0, and the average score is 48-22 UTSA.
Wow.
To say that UTSA has had the upper hand in against UTEP with trailer at coach is
an understatement.
Yeah, that's probably the best word to put it. Look, UTEP is coached by Dana Dimmel. This Dana Dimmel era has been just quite odd, and really it's just been inconsistent. They've been just so up and down at times. Like we've talked about, previously, how teams can be up and down every single game. That's pretty much UTEP right there. Like if you're gonna describe, what UTEP is like in the last couple seasons, even a season before that, that is just puro UTEP.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. We were listening to an ESPN crew that covers UTEP and listening to their recap from their win over FIU. And one of the guys said, we've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly this season with UTEP. And like you said, it's just that inconsistency. It's got to be a roller coaster.
It's got to be even worse for the fans. I mean, It's hard, I think, to really, strengthen that fan base when you're just such a roller coaster like that. And look, one of the things that Dana Dimmel said, and we were, to reference back that radio show that we were listening to, he said the guy got fired up because he says, oh yeah, Dimmel came out and said, that UTEP is a tough out and they can play with anyone. Well, yeah, that's college football in a nutshell, right? Like, there's not really an easy out. Even when you're playing a team like La Tech or Rice, like we did, it wasn't like they were going to be necessarily an easy team to beat if you weren't focused and you weren't ready to play. And that's really what it comes down to. Are you focused and ready to play these teams? And at least with UTEP, I'll say this. Look, coaches are paid to win games. So just to say, oh, they can play with anyone, I think just tells you everything you need to know about where Dana Dimmel is and where UTEP is at. Mm-hmm. Because he's being paid quite a bit of money to make sure that they continue to build. And so, in my opinion, I just don't see that he's necessarily the guy that can turn it around. I think he's done a good job in at least trying to build something there. But, I think somebody else needs to go in there and some fresh blood and to really, I think, take it to the next couple levels. More consistent winning and really, really, I think, challenging for conference titles. Let's get to their offense. It's 5th in total offense in Conference USA at 409 yards per game. 7th in scoring, 27.4 points per game. I think one of the reasons they have this huge roller coaster is because of the quarterback. Mm-hmm. I've talked about Gavin Hardison all season. I just get frustrated with him when it comes to watching any UTEP games. And, we've talked about how sicko we are in terms of watching college football. We watch more UTEP games than I care to even admit to. But the question I think that you have is Brownholtz or Hardison at quarterback?
Yeah, and that's the question that their fan base has right now. Hardison got hurt in the Rice game. Brownholtz came in. He played well. He played very well against FIU. Look, overall, he's not a great quarterback, but he seems to be a better quarterback than Hardison and perhaps does a better job running the offense that Dimmel wants. The interesting thing about Brownholtz, though, is that he has said, this is it. He's done after this season. He has another year of eligibility, but he doesn't plan to use it. So this game could be his last game, or it might have been the FIU game, because it sounds like Hardison is healthy enough to return. So it'll just be a coach's decision of whether or not they put Hardison back in there because he's been their starter and they've stuck with him, when he's been healthy, or, do they put in Brownholtz and try to make the most competitive run that they can against UTSA, even though I don't know that that's going to make a significant amount of difference. It might be the difference between, 1 or 2 scores, but.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that Calvin Brownholtz gives UTEP a better chance of competing, but he's just still not good enough to really help UTEP get over that hump. I think the danger for UTEP is if they had Hardison in there, he wasn't a very mobile quarterback to begin with, and with the sore ankle, because that was really his injury, or even still just a bad, ankle sprain. You can't be not mobile against this UTSA defense. You've got to be able to move around.
And the way things are looking right now, just in the overall bowl picture, there's a chance, it's slim, but there is a chance that some of these teams that are sitting there in the bubble don't get to 6 wins. So there could be 1 or 2 5-7 teams that get a bowl bid. So on the one hand, for a UTEP, do you want to risk Hardison getting even more injured if there is that opportunity? I mean, slim to none, but there is still a slim chance that, like I said, 1 or 2 of these teams could get a bowl bid, and then what do you do if he is really your guy and he gets even further injured in this UTSA game?
Agreed. Let me give you some stats real quick on both quarterbacks. Calvin Brownholtz has a career against UTSA of he's 1 for 1 for 10 yards. No rushing yards and 1 touchdown run. The reason I think that he's just slightly better is just because of the fact that, especially in the Rice game, it really became evident that he can actually do more of a read option look, and with that, he gives that sort of running quarterback look. He's I think the best way I described him to you is, to me, he was sort of at least in that Rice game, reminded me of a poor man's Dalton Sturm.
Yeah, certainly not as talented, but he had a couple of nice little scrambles that were reminiscent of Dalton.
Right. There really was. And so, that really stood out to me. And I think against this UTSA defense, again, like I said, it makes it a little more competitive and gives UTSA something else to think about, but certainly not enough to go ahead and really say UTEP has that much better of a chance.
Right.
Gavin Hardison has completed against UTSA in his 2 games 52.9% of his passes for 406 yards and 4 touchdowns. Has not thrown an interception. He's been sacked 4 times by this UTSA D in the last 2 games. Look, I've ragged on the guy all season, and certainly this injury has been bad for him, obviously, because it keeps him off the field, but I think it's helped UTEP in an unfortunate way because of the fact that they were able to find Calvin Brownholtz, and now there's sort of a quote-unquote quarterback controversy, and it's unfortunate that Brownholtz isn't going to come back, because I think that the way he's been operating this offense now certainly could give UTEP fans more hope, but it is what it is, right? Running backs. This is where I just scratch my head. Because Dion Hankins has 670 yards, but only 3 touchdowns. And Ron Awatt has 655 yards, 2 touchdowns. These are 2 good running backs for Conference USA. I mean, really any, I would say, G5 conference. They're pretty solid. But for some reason, maybe it's because it's UTEP, they just, to me, haven't been able to get the most out of both of these players.
Right.
A lot of it has to do with the offensive line, but the biggest thing is quarterback. When your quarterback is having problems, completing passes, consistently, like Gavin Hardison does, everybody's going to sit back or at least crowd the line of scrimmage and stop Awatt and Hankins. But I will say this: look, they're really only rushers. They don't catch the ball out of the backfield.
A
I
little
wish
more
the
one
best for them.
dimensional.
Yeah, I wish the best for them because I thought that that they would be bigger stars about this time, but it just hasn't happened for them. And honestly, I think it's a lot because of the way UTEP has run their offense. Um, their two wide receivers are kind of short. They're 5'10" and 6 foot respectively. You got Tyron Smith and Ray Flores. Tyron Smith actually caught a 42-yard touchdown pass last season against UTSA. It was late in the game. It wasn't like it was early in the game because at one point last season it was this really good UTEP team versus this really good UTSA team, and it was being hyped up. And in the third quarter, at one point, we were up 37-9.
Yeah.
UTSA pretty much put that to bed quickly. Tyron Smith has caught 67 passes, which is the most on the team, 940 yards, 6 touchdowns. Ray Flores actually just kind of popped up out of nowhere. He's second in the team in receptions, 47 for 511 yards and 1 touchdown. He's also kind of does some work in the backfield as a running back. So kind of interesting to kind of see that he kind of does dual roles at times. But he could be also a nice change of pace with Dion and Ron. So look, they've got a solid offensive line with some good tackles and Jeremiah Byers and Stephen Hubbard. It's just, again, mind-boggling. You have a pretty good offensive line and you can't really run the ball consistently. This offense to me just as a UTEP fan would make me just tear my hair out. And it's better than some of these bad like UTSA teams that UTEP still lost to. I just scratch my head. I just don't know why they haven't gotten more out of this offense. Let's go to the defense though. Second in total defense in CUSA at 358 yards per game. They're sixth in scoring, 27.9 points per game. they score half a point less than they give up. That can be a problem if you're trying to win games. It doesn't matter which conference it is. They've played the least amount of plays on defense, hence why they're giving up about 358 yards per game. They've only 421 plays in Conference USA. But because of that, they're giving up about 6 yards per play. So contrast that with UTSA in the same context. I think they're giving up like 5.2 or 5.4 yards per play. So the 0.6 might not seem like a lot, but we've seen how this UTSA defense can attack a team. Look, they've got a stout rushing defense. It's just that passing defense is leaky, and that's because there's a lot of their defensive backs aren't very good. They've got a really good front seven. Starts with defensive end Praise Amuwale. I think I said his name right. And defensive tackle Keenan Stewart. They were there in the game last season. These guys are, again, having pretty good seasons. But I think the big playmakers here are Jadrian Taylor, not Deadrian, Jadrian. Defensive end, he leads the team with 8.5 sacks. And then linebacker Cal Wallerstad is second with 6.5 stats. I'll go back and say that Tyrese Knight is their linebacker that leads the team in tackles with 87. Wallerstad is second with 86. Wallerstad is a guy that UTSA is going to have to keep an eye on. I mean, obviously, their front seven is, like I said, pretty stout. But Wallerstad, leading in sacks, second in tackles, tells you right away that this guy's a playmaker. And somebody that they're certainly going to have to keep a very big eye out on. So, keys to victory on offense. To me, from what I've seen about UTEP this year, keep that tempo high because UTEP has struggled against up-tempo teams. And then I want to see UTSA take some deep ball chances. We haven't really seen a lot of that this year, and a lot of it's been because of the way the offense has been constructed. But I kind of want to see that, Frank, I think with the way this offensive line has really kind of come together and has gotten healthier, I think they'll be able to take some deep ball chances. On defense, simple, stop the run. It's funny because I think you went back and were looking for some keys to victory to stop in UTEP.
Yeah, I came across a Bleacher Report. It was UTEP, and I don't remember who the opponent was, but it was from 2012, and it was number 1, stop the run, force UTEP to pass. And then I start reading it, and I was like, that's not either one of the quarterbacks. I'm like, oh, this is an article from 2012. So apparently we've been running the same offense at UTEP, since 2012.
Right.
And,
to not much success.
Right.
The other thing I think on defense, you have to watch out for the play action and limit it because of the fact that they certainly can really play off that pretty well. And especially with Brownholtz now, they will certainly look to do the read option and then potentially just fake and then make a throw. UTEP at its best on offense is one that throws less than 20 times and runs it well more than 30 times. So, numbers to kind of keep in your head as you watch this game. So, my way too early prediction. Look at senior day for UTSA. So, it's not going to be taken lightly by UTSA whatsoever, plus the chances that you talked about in terms of a New Year's Six Bowl. Again, may not happen, but as long as there's a carrot there, and as you said earlier in this podcast, this team plays better with a chip on their shoulder and trying to prove something, not getting ranked by the AP, just one more thing to pile onto this team that they're just not going to be happy about. I also think coaching really matters in college football, and Traylor is just head and shoulders above Dana Dimmel. Look, I think this UTSA defense forces a couple of turnovers in the mid first half, I think, which starts breaking this game open before halftime. Frank is going to hit a couple of long passes, and he's going to get to enjoy this game sitting on the bench about the third quarter or so. So give me UTSA 41-17 over UTEP, capping an undefeated regular CUSA season.
All right, before we go, let's talk about everything else that happened in Conference USA this weekend. Sort of interesting, all but one of the games in Conference USA was very lopsided. In all of the wins, except for the Charlotte and Louisiana Tech game, the winning team scored in the 40s. Kind of interesting. We already talked about UTEP, but they beat FIU 40-6. Middle Tennessee beat up on FAU. They won 49-21. Sort of interesting. I mean, Middle Tennessee, we've talked about it. They're kind of this anomaly this year. They actually are bowl eligible with this win. And they're kind of at the bottom of the Conference USA rankings. So it's interesting to see teams like UTEP, Rice, FAU that are ahead of them in rankings that are not bowl eligible. So I'm not sure what to make of Middle Tennessee.
Middle Tennessee and FAU are so Jekyll and Hyde. We had talked about it just right now with UTEP. If you want to talk about it like at a bigger level, these two teams, like FAU is supposed to be trying to go for the spot in the championship game, and look where they're at now. They're completely out of it. So it's so bizarre. Yeah. I mean, well, I guess with this third win, they have now put themselves in a tie in the Conference USA standings with UAB, Rice, and UTEP for fourth place in the conference. Yeah. But out of that group, they are the only ones that are bowl eligible. So I don't know what to say about them. Moving along, Western Kentucky got beat 41-17 by Auburn. And LSU beat up on UAB 41-10. So, again, there is this kind of 40s theme happening for good and bad in Conference USA. Not sure what the significance of that is, but there you have it. Moving on to UTSA basketball. Women's basketball had a tough loss against TCU earlier in the week, 67-74. But they came back and they won their first home game against Abilene Christian, 76-70. We had 5 girls with double-digit scoring, so it was a pretty impressive outing for the Roadrunners. Yeah, a little bit of tough shooting. Maybe it's just the cold, but to be honest with you, I like the intensity that they had on defense, and then they on offense they just need to be a little bit more under control. They'll be in Vegas this weekend for the Las Vegas Invitational. Nice. So hopefully they'll have some success there. Men's basketball, kind of the surprise here. They are off to their best start since 2012. They beat St. Mary's 66-59 at home. I feel like I personally had a piece of that victory because they were kind of back and forth against St. Mary's. And we had kind of walked behind the court and we're coming back along, the court side to head over to the concession area, and the ball went flying out of bounds. And, I have this thing about getting hit by a ball. I'm just
constantly afraid that it's going to happen. So I see the ball come flying at me. And of course I did the very girly, like hands up to the face, yell, and smacked the ball away from me. And it went flying into the back of a cop. But nonetheless, because I touched the ball, I feel like right after that, that's when UTSA kind of started to rally. So maybe it was my touch on the ball that helped.
I'm not sure who ran faster, AToves or Coach Traylor. There was certainly that kind of reaction, and so.
Well, I was like, I mean, I know I didn't intend
you didn't do anything
cop.
wrong. I'm just trying to make that
When you
point.
have that cop turn around and look at you like, what the hell just happened? It's like, hi, I gotta go.
You did nothing wrong. The ball was coming at you, and you batted it away. Look,
I was just defending myself.
yes,
It was self-defense.
Exactly.
But nonetheless, they turned it around at that point, and like I said, won 66-59. Followed that up by beating Texas State 61-56 at home in the Convocation Center. Henson seems to have Texas State's number, but that was a really fun and exciting game.
Yeah. Japhet Medor, I think I'm saying his name right. If not, whoops. Was really clutch at the end of that game. Look, it was good to see a point guard actually be able to handle the ball and actually really take advantage of the mismatch that was on him, and he did so. There was unfortunately there was this Texas State player that's pretty short. It was actually pretty good. Who's I think was second on their team in scoring for the night. Just had a tough matchup against Japhet. So I think it's a nice start. It's certainly not the most difficult out of conference. So hopefully they can get some confidence here in this out of conference schedule and really kind of buoy them into Conference USA and maybe surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. They'll be at home against Prairie View on Tuesday at 7, and then they're hosting the San Antonio Shootout this weekend. So there'll be at least 2 opportunities to see them play. They're playing Grambling on Friday at 7. Or I guess 3 opportunities to see them play. They're playing Grambling on Friday at 7, Dartmouth on Sunday at 7:30, and UIW at 6:30 on Monday. All right, I think that about wraps it up for us here in the Hail Married podcast. Thanks for joining us. I'm AToves.
And I'm the Toves.
We'll be back next week to recap our win over UTEP and secure a undefeated season in Conference USA.
Birds up.